All right, folks, may I have your attention again, please? All right, thank you everybody for being here. We have a nice full house on this Easter weekend. I want to welcome Dr. Brian Moench, our speaker today, a doctor of anesthesia. Dr. Moench was an undergraduate in anesthesia from Stanford, attended medical school at University of Utah, and did an internship in internal medicine at LDS Hospital. He was in private practice in anesthesia from 1981 until 2020. He's conducted thousands of operating room anesthetics over 40 years and taught dozens of residents, interns, and med students the art and science of intraoperative anesthesia. Brian became concerned about the environmental impacts on personal health after seeing medical tragedies, especially in cancer in family members and patients with no other explanation. In 2007, he founded Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, one of the largest civic organizations of medical professionals in the Western U.S. Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment works closely with Sierra Club, Earth Justice, Wildlife Guardians, and other nonprofits. Dr. Moench has written numerous articles. He's been an author of a few books and appeared on many national television interviews and programs. He's also created a humorous greeting card company that has humorous cards about, I think, mostly medical doctor jokes. An avid cyclist, now resuming his high school avocation as a portrait artist, please welcome Dr. Brian Moench.
Let me just say at the beginning, I was a student at Olympus High when Carol Moss was a teacher, and she was one of the best. You could not have made a better choice to give that award to. I'm honored to be here today, especially to be in a room full of people who have Trump derangement syndrome. Now, I know a lot of you are very concerned about the stage of this particular era of our country, the state, the world. And probably like you, I am especially concerned. I guess I'm done. Thank you for having me. See you later. Now, I got to admit, having a big block right there in front of his face is just fine with me.
All yours, sir.
Okay. All right. That's not an improvement, by the way. But one of my greatest concerns, like you, is our lack of ballrooms. So I'm sure that many of you were very disappointed, if not outraged, to find a couple of days ago that a judge ruled that the construction of the ballroom at the White House had to cease. Now, as mad as you are at that, there is hope. And here's the hope. Governor Cox has offered to tear down the Utah State Capitol so that Trump can build his ballroom here in Salt Lake City. Now, this is one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King. Nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. And so when I read that, this comes to mind. Our beloved senator from Utah who recently just said, let's resume underground testing in Nevada. So that reminds me of this picture. And there's a medical diagnosis for this, and it's called science derangement syndrome. Now, there are various versions of this. Governor Cox has asked the state to pray now for more precipitation 3 times. I'm not opposed to prayer. I mean, I'm a firm believer, kind of. Well, okay, I've tried it out. I've tried out prayer. I've prayed for a new legislature. I've prayed for a new governor. But I've been lately very concerned about the state's love affair, instantaneous love affair with nuclear power. So I've been praying about nuclear power. And last night, I got an answer. I had a revelation that I want to share with you. Oh, I should mention, Governor Cox's prayer actually was very effective. Unfortunately, all the water went to China. That's actually about a 30-year flood that happened about 3 or 4 days after Governor Cox announced that day of prayer. So it was close, but not quite where we wanted it. Okay, this is what God said to me. And behold, verily I say unto you, thou shalt not build nuclear power plants, you stupid morons. If there is any state that should refuse to expose its people to more radioactivity, it should be Utah. This is stupidity like no one's ever seen before. What is wrong with you people? Thank you for your attention to this matter. God, pronouns, she, hers. So God delivered to me the 10 commandments of nuclear stupidity. And what's more appropriate than that on the day before Easter? So let's talk about the 10 commandments of nuclear stupidity. These are photographs of nuclear explosions except for one. Anybody wanted to take a stab at which one is not a photograph? Oh, nice. And it takes a young person here to understand that. Okay. That's right. That's Sauron from Lord of the Rings. And that's actually a very good backdrop for what we're going to talk about. The first commandment is the federal government, right from the get-go, developed nuclear processes behind a mushroom cloud of deception and outright lies. There is a term called the nuclear village, which refers to governments and agencies and corporations that all have a very vested interest in nuclear power and nuclear weapons. In fact, nuclear power was developed as a means of assuaging the public's concern about a potential nuclear holocaust. So they all have this self-interest in maintaining the public's perception of the nuclear process as being safe. And that's been right from the get-go. This is an actual photograph, the only one that I'm aware of the explosion over Nagasaki. I don't know what those 3 guys in the front are talking about, but this is an actual photograph of what happened. Well, we sent members of our military into Hiroshima and Nagasaki about a month later to see what had gone on, and they found things like this. And the Army, in response to these kinds of rumors, said to the public, stories of hideous deaths from radioactivity of the atomic bomb were pure propaganda. They even said to the public, dying from radiation was a pleasant way to die. Never mind the fact that the soldiers that they sent over there to investigate these sites in person started having symptoms of radiation sickness within a couple of weeks. They never owned up to anything later. And 12 years later, after Nagasaki, they sent this out to assuage the concerns of people in Utah. You people who live near the Nevada nuclear test site are, in a very real sense, active participants in the nation's atomic test program. You have been close observers of tests which have contributed greatly to the building the defenses of our country and of the free world. Every test detonation in Nevada is currently evaluated as to your safety before it is included in a schedule. Every phase of the operation is likewise studied from a safety standpoint. Nevada test fallout has not caused illness or injured the health of anyone living near the test site. 12 years after Nagasaki. We even know now from research in public documents that the Army had a deliberate re-education campaign that included these kinds of phrases. The public will accept the possibility of an atomic explosion within 100 miles or so of their home. They can feel at home with neutrons trotting around. This is what our government told us years and years after they knew better. Many of you may be aware of, or maybe you were young enough to, I should say old enough to remember that over 4,000 sheep died within a few weeks after a massive number of nuclear bombs tests in Utah. The Army never owned up to what really caused it. We obviously know in retrospect what did, but here's the kicker. They knew what did it. The owners of the sheep didn't know. They didn't tell the owners of the sheep that their sheep were radioactive, the meat and the wool was radioactive, and the sheep herders sold all that to people in Utah, having never been told by the government what was going on. Any of you know what this is? This is not Star Wars. These are the nuclear liquidators in Chernobyl. There are about 800,000 of them. And we were told by supposedly credible organizations, including the World Health Organization and the International Atomic Energy Agency, that the explosion in Chernobyl that spread nuclear radiation across the globe only caused 43 deaths and maybe 4,000 fatal cancers. Soviet authorities officially prohibited doctors from connecting the diseases with radiation. All the data was classified for the first 3 years. They did not acknowledge any consequences outside of Belarus, Ukraine, or European Russia, despite the fact that much of Europe was blanketed with this. Now, from agencies that don't have any sort of allegiance to a government, we know that about 1 out of 6 of those liquidators has died. And that was as of the early 2000s. 94% as of the early 2000s were ill in some way or another. Now the government of Ukraine acknowledges that 1.8 million Ukrainians can be considered victims, eligible for some sort of government compensation. They estimate 1 million pregnancies were lost. 750 million people worldwide were affected. Scientists now know, if they're not connected to the usual nuclear village I mentioned a minute ago, 90% of the disease burden would show up in later generations. Photographers and journalists were allowed to go into that area that had been so badly contaminated, and they said, we went from hospital to hospital, from one contaminated village to another, and they found adolescents with stunted growth and dwarfed torsos, fetuses without thighs or fingers, and villagers who told us every member of their family was sick. One doctor in tears told us that 1 in 3 pregnancies in some places was malformed and that she was overwhelmed by people with immune and endocrine system disorders. Those official numbers that I gave you a few minutes ago are pure propaganda. Now we know that approximately 6,000 children are born annually with genetic heart defects, a 250% increase in congenital birth deformities in the children born in the Chernobyl fallout area since 1986. In Belarus, which maybe took the worst of it, 85% of children are deemed to be Chernobyl victims with genetic changes. There has been a 38% increase in malignant tumors and a 63% increase in musculoskeletal disorders, like the one you're seeing here. Now let's talk about Fukushima, the most recently one. We were told all kinds of things about this. We were told, oh, it couldn't have been prevented, it was such an act of nature. And yet, retrospective analysis by nuclear engineers know that it was not a matter of the danger was not unknown, unknowable, or unpredictable. It was merely ignored and covered up. These are statements by some of these same international agencies and governments. The first one, a branch of the World Health Organization. No public ill effects are expected. No health effects are expected among the Japanese people. This third one was from President Barack Obama. The nuclear release from Japan will dissipate by the time it gets to Hawaii, much less the US mainland. At the request of the Japanese government 2 months later, the US EPA decreased the frequency of measuring radioactivity in air, rain, milk, and drinking water to quarterly from weekly, just 7 weeks after the accident. We know from investigative journalism in Japan that Japanese workers were told to cover up their dosimeters with lead and lie about the radiation levels they were exposed to. International experts now estimate that the radiation release from the accident was far greater than the Japanese government had claimed. And this is a study that just never got any publicity. 10 weeks after the accident, there was a 35% spike in infant deaths in 122 cities in the United States compared to the same time the year before. And if so, if that's caused by the radiation, we're talking about 14,000 newborns that could have been victims of the radiation from Fukushima. They found new radiation particles they'd never seen before, called cesium-rich microparticles that contained 10,000 times more radioactivity than what they thought was possible with soluble versions of cesium. Xenon, which several isotopes can be radioactive, measured at Richmond, Washington, was found to be 40,000 times higher than normal. Okay, second commandment. The National Academy of the Sciences issued this BEAR report number 7. That stands for Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation. They established there is no safe level of exposure. That's why you should not get an X-ray you don't need. You should never get a CAT scan that you don't need. And it's why the medical profession, and I'm part of that, is very derelict in not helping patients understand you need to know how much radiation you've been exposed to. If a doctor orders a CAT scan for you, you both need to know how many CAT scans have you had before. Because we now estimate that if you've had 4 to 5 CAT scans, and I'm one of them, that's about the same amount of radiation as if you were 2 to 3 miles away from the nuclear bombs that were exploded in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I can tell you, my colleagues aren't telling people that, but they need to tell them, and you need to know to protect yourself. You need to know how much radiation you've been exposed to. We now estimate that of the 63 million CAT scans that are done, or excuse me, the CAT scans done on 63 million people every year are probably responsible for 100,000 cancers. So this is an expression of there's no safe level of exposure. Sorry, jumped ahead of myself. Okay, commandment number 3. Every phase of the nuclear fuel cycle emits radiation into the environment. From the mining of the uranium, to the milling, to the production of the nuclear fuel rods, to the normal operation of a nuclear plant which discharges radiation into the air and the water around it, and then to the attempted storage of spent nuclear fuel rods, and an eventual decommissioning of the plants. Every phase of that discharges radioactivity into the environment. Women are 50% more sensitive to external radiation. Children are 3 to 5 times more exposed to internal radiation, and obviously female children are the most sensitive subgroup. Now, by internal radiation, we're talking about radioactive particles like alpha particles and beta particles, as opposed to gamma rays or X-rays, which is a one-time exposure and then the exposure ends. But if you ingest some of these radioactive particles, either through your mouth or through your lungs or maybe even through your skin, that radiation can go on for a long time, even years. It only takes one cell to have mutations it cannot repair to trigger a cancer, just one single cell. Most cancers are caused by internal radiation. So children are the ones that are the most at risk, and especially female children. And through the processes of bioaccumulation, biomagnification, and bioconcentration, the exposure can go on for decades. Now let me explain what those mean. We know that a tuna fish swimming in the ocean will end up with about 1 million times higher concentration of mercury in its flesh than exists in the ocean that they swim in. That's from bioconcentration. That same process is applicable here to nuclear radiation, nuclear isotopes, the exact same process. Number 6, exposure at any stage of life jeopardizes your health in all future stages. So that means the earlier you are exposed, the more profound impact it can have. And yet early life exposure is still being ignored in regulation and in most research. And when I talk about early life exposure, I even mean preconception. Because we now know that the harm can be transferred to subsequent generations. Number 7, all nuclear plants are potential global disasters that threaten the health and future of mankind and every living thing. I don't know how people just dismissed that. We've seen it now at least 3 times. In fact, there are others that you've never heard about. There were a lot of it just swept under the rug by multiple governments, including our own. This is the sarcophagus that has been placed over the Chernobyl site where that terrible explosion was. It's the second one. They first tried to hastily, over a matter of about 9 months, put a cement and steel structure around that nuclear site explosion because most of the radioactivity is still there. About somewhere around over 200 tons of highly radioactive material is still there. So they hastily threw this together using some of those liquidators that I showed you pictures of. Well, they knew that wouldn't last. So in the early 2000s, they started planning for what do we do next. Well, they started planning for this later sarcophagus, a great big steel dome, cost them $2 billion, and they were able to get it on top of the other sarcophagus in 2016. And they expect that'll last only about 100 years. Well, thanks to the genius and black heart of Vladimir Putin, he sent drones to attack that sarcophagus in the early stages of the Ukraine war. So now we have international war that is involving nuclear power plants as hostages. And it isn't Iran yet. So far, it's been Russia. Okay, this isn't the idyllic village. This is a village where everybody has health care, everybody has a job, they all love their neighbors, they all go to church, they all pay their taxes, and they never say anything bad about anybody. It's like Provo. But what if I were to tell you that this idyllic village has no sewer system and no prospects of ever developing one? How many of you are signing up to go there? Well, that's the exact same situation we're in with nuclear power. The materials used to contain nuclear waste are deteriorating faster than anyone would have thought. Now what do we do? And it's not just barrels that look like this. These are some of the 177 massive storage tanks in Hanford, Washington, that are storing the waste from all of our nuclear weapons production. A third of them are already leaking, and that plume of radioactive isotopes is now migrating to and has probably reached the Columbia River. These gigantic tanks of nuclear waste have to be stirred constantly to keep them from overheating. We have not come up with a solution for high-level nuclear waste. We just have not. That alone disqualifies nuclear power from being part of our future portfolio. The ninth commandment, nuclear power is by far the most expensive form of energy by far. This statement was from Forbes magazine. The failure of the U.S. nuclear power program ranks as the largest managerial disaster in business history, a disaster on a monumental scale. There's no comparison of any other kind of energy source with the cost of nuclear power. Every single one of them has had cost overruns and delays that lead to the next, not quite the next one. They consume about as much water as coal-fired power plants. And in a desert Where our drought persists and is getting worse almost by the minute, the lake will reach its lowest levels this fall, ever. They consume as much water as a coal-fired power plant. It's not a solution to the climate crisis. Because if for no other reason it takes so long to build them, if all these other problems were things I had just made up, the length of time it takes to build them and the cost and so forth, that's not going to solve our problems with the climate crisis, because climate scientists have told us we only have maybe a handful of years to finally solve this and address it aggressively. And if we don't do it by then, those feedback loops will kick in and the disaster will be irreversible. It is not a solution to the climate crisis. Imagine all the money that has been spent on nuclear power. If that had been spent on truly renewable energy, we'd be in a far better place. Okay, now I want you to read an op-ed that I wrote in Utah's News Dispatch, March 27th. Governor Cox has anointed 3 companies to bring this nuclear nirvana here to Utah. Here's one of them. The CEO is this guy, Isaiah Taylor. He's 27 years old. He is literally a high school dropout. His previous experience was running an auto shop. Now, he might be a very smart person, but he has no formal education in anything, let alone nuclear fission. And this came to light when he had an interview with a reporter who had seen on his website from Valor Atomics this statement. He said, his nuclear spent fuel rods would be so safe that you could hold them in your hand for 5 minutes, and that would be about the same amount of radiation as 1 CAT scan. In truth, you would be dead within less than a second. This guy shouldn't be within 100 miles of a nuclear power plant, let alone building one. This guy, Chris Hayter, there's nothing wrong with this guy. He has a business administration degree from a junior college. He was a nuclear reactor technician for a number of years. He was an accountant for a Gold's Gym. He started High Tech Solutions. That's the expertise that he brings, and he said to a news outlet here a couple of weeks ago, he said, nuclear power is safe because I've been around nuclear power plants all my life. You can see how young he is. And I'm healthy, so what's the problem? That's the CEO of the second company. Here's the third. Chris Singh, CEO of Holtec. Now, he does have a PhD in engineering. I'll give him that. His company has been embroiled in one scandal after another for 15 years, involving the federal government, involving state governments, most of them financial, not all of them. He's been sued by multiple former employees and back and forth. I think it was last year. His main area of his company's main area of expertise is decommissioning nuclear power plants, and in the course of doing that, he wanted to dump 1 million gallons of radioactive water into Cape Cod Bay. The state agencies involved said, no, you can't do that. So what he did is he secretly heated up the tanks of that radioactive water and evaporated it, so nobody knew, which is just as dangerous as if the water had been discharged into Cape Cod Bay. And we're talking about water that's this radioactive. 1 million times more, or 1 million times higher concentrations of radioactive tritium than in background levels, and 200 million times higher concentrations of radioactive cesium. And he just let it rip. This is the third company that Governor Cox wants to bring nuclear nirvana to the state of Utah. So, if there is any state that should refuse to expose its people to more radioactivity, it should be Utah, obviously. And it brings me back to nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. We have to reject Governor Cox and the legislature's push for nuclear power in the state of Utah for all of these 10 commandments, which turned out actually to be 11. Sorry about that. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Am I supposed to answer questions or just get out of town real quickly?
Yeah, Doctor, would you mind answering some questions from our audience?
It depends on what the question is.
Well, here, we have one right up here.
Thank you. So, school teacher here, I have a question. What about like TSA scanners when we're going through the airport rather slowly currently?
Very good question.
Curious.
The original iteration of them was a little bit of a concern. The subsequent iterations of them really are not, but certainly for the first number of years that they started doing that, yeah, I had that exact same concern, especially for people who are frequent flyers. Yeah. Yes?
When we moved here from New Jersey in '95, we had to test the house we were selling for radon. When we bought a house here, there was no similar requirement for the house we were buying. Foolishly, in spite of realizing Utah has a radon problem, I didn't test until recently. And surprise, surprise, the levels were quite elevated. So I've had 30 years of exposure to radon. So my question and my ask is for any legislators here or candidates, can we introduce mandatory radon testing for any house sales or new construction?
It's a great question, and it's a great suggestion because we definitely should. Somewhere between a third and a fourth of the homes along the Wasatch Front have enough radon in their basements that they need to be vented. Air pollution is a cause of lung cancer too, so is radon. Pulmonologist that I think highly of thinks about 25% of the lung cancer in this state is caused by our air pollution. But there's a significant amount that's caused by radon. I'm friends with 2 nurses, PhD nurses, who have both come down with advanced lung cancer, never smoked, never had any risk factors other than the air we breathe, and they didn't have radon exposure either. But radon is heavier than air. It tends to accumulate in the basements, so that's where it needs to be measured. But there are fairly inexpensive solutions to venting it out to the general environment, which is not that great, but much better than in your basement. So, your suggestion is very good, and if I see some legislators around here, and there might be a few, they need to take that up. Because it isn't just cancer. Radon causes all the diseases that we know of are related to radioactive exposure, but certainly cancer is at the top of the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moench. Seems like now is a time to talk about the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. I'm a downwinder. I have cancer, probably as a result of those tests in Nevada. But many of you may be too, or maybe your parents, or maybe your friends. And it involves a lot of different cancers that you can receive compensation for, including very common cancers like breast cancer, all kinds of lung cancers, multiple myeloma, all of these things. Again, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECA, provides $100,000. And if your parent died, you can collect that money. So I'm just going to say now is the time to be making those claims. You still have some time to do that through sometime in 2027. You have to have lived here for a year, or the person who had it, in a period of time ending in November of 1962. So it's really important. Again, it could be your parent, it could be your grandparent. You could be fine, you could be recovered, but there's $100,000 out there for you.
Patrice, thank you very much for that. And let me just add a couple of things. There are about 17 different cancers that are covered from that. But what happened, there's one and only one thing that happened with the big, beautiful bill that can be considered a positive, and that is the areas covered for RECA compensation extended now to the entire state, to the state of Idaho, and to other parts of New Mexico and Arizona and Nevada. So yeah, there are very common cancers that are covered. The eligibility requires having lived in the state for 1 year between 1951 and 1962, certain months of that particular 11-year span, and 1 month in 1962 where there was a great increase in the amount of radiation released from the nuclear weapons testing era. But common cancers like breast cancer, which affects 1 out of every 7 women, are covered. Unfortunately, prostate cancer, which affects 1 out of every 7 men, is not. But a lot of them are, and a lot of people don't know about that. The compensation is about $100,000. If that person is deceased, their survivors are eligible for that. They'd have to split it up. Spouses are eligible for that. So yeah, it's a good thing that the government finally acknowledged that, and people need to take advantage of it. Our physicians group is periodically informing people of that to try and spread the word. Well, there's a website. The Department of Justice has a website that explains the details about it. It can give you all the eligibility requirements. Now, it's not an easy application per se, but it's doable. I've had a member of my family who succeeded in that. She had a little bit of government experience, so she was aided in that. But it's doable. It's a little bit onerous, and it may take some time. You have to prove residency. You have to prove that you were here somehow. Church records help with that. Birth certificates, etc., school records, those kinds of things. You have to demonstrate, A, that you lived here during that time frame, and B, prove that you had cancer. I'm not sure about Page, but it very well might be. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Patrice. My mother-in-law is one of those who lived in Utah during that time, and we are pursuing that avenue. I have some interesting experience with nuclear, which sounds kind of weird. A long time ago, I worked for the Illinois Department of Energy and Natural Resources, and east of the Mississippi, nuclear power is very common. We have a different viewpoint of it out west for obvious reasons. My father-in-law worked at Alamogordo. I've been to the Trinitite testing site, and am very acutely aware that downwinder syndrome is a real thing. However, this was my question. We know that alternate energy is very expensive. And as much as I'm a huge fan of wind farms, that's not necessarily the most ecological savvy way long term. So in order for policy to be created, it can't just be shock and awe and fear-based, right? There's got to be something that's a compromise. We know that the earth will stop producing coal one day, that it just won't have enough natural resources, right? And we know that alternate fuel tends to be cost prohibitive. So what is the policy argument that will appeal to lawmakers that makes this something that is untenable, meaning nuclear, right? Because the nuclear facility is going into Utah, from what I understand. I don't think it's really negotiable. So if that's the case, how do we make sure it's the safest alternative energy possible? And you probably know that there was a nuclear reactor at the University of Utah for a very long time. So it's not like it's not like it's brand new. And one last thing, I was a teenager during Chernobyl. It's the worst thing ever. It happened the same year the space shuttle. I thought the world was ending, right? They happened within a couple of months of each other. And I grew up with the fear of 3 Mile Island. The truth is, not one person died during the 3 Mile Island meltdown. So there's got to be some kind of middle ground between nuclear meltdown is completely horrific. We acknowledge that. But in a world where nuclear...
Can I interrupt you there?
Sure.
And I don't mean this in a belligerent way, but you're wrong on multiple counts. We have spent the last 5 months developing a very intensive report on all the reasons why Utah in particular, but the nation in general, should not be developing a fleet of nuclear power reactors, regardless of the size. Now, you and I could argue a lot of different things, at length that we don't have time to do here, and I'd be happy to try and do that. But our report will be finished in about 2 or 3 days. I would encourage you to read it, and if you'll give me your email, I'll send you a personal copy of the PDF. If you read that and you think that we've mischaracterized anything, I would like you to get back to me and tell me how we mischaracterized it. But in short, you're wrong about the cost, you're wrong about the danger, you're wrong about whether or not it's a climate solution.
But I'm not wrong that many exist in the United States today safely.
Well, that's my point, is that and I didn't have time to go into all this, but the epidemiologic data suggests that cancer rates are elevated around nuclear power plants. That's just not disputable throughout the world. Every phase of the nuclear fuel cycle, regardless of where it is, and most of those uranium mines are in the West, most of those enormous radon piles, 200 million tons, for example, are in the West, and they're producing radon that, as heavier than air, just scatters throughout the entire environment. We can't identify any particular person that, yeah, they got cancer from radon, but we know that if you increase those environmental hazards, you're going to have increased elevation of all kinds of diseases, cancer only being one of them, amongst the whole population. So anyway, I appreciate that perspective, and I hope you get a chance to read our report, and I'd love to talk to you more about it. Thanks.
Dr. Moench, can you say where that report will be available?
It'll be available in the middle of next week. We just we had to cull a few pictures that were from Getty Images, and if they try and find you use a picture that they have copyrighted, then they'll come after you with really barracuda attorneys. So we're calling it some pictures from that report, but the text is all done, and we'll be done with that picture purging in a couple of days.
And where will that report be available?
It'll be on our website, and if anybody wants to give me their email, I'll give you your own personal PDF copy of it. uphe.org, Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment.org.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The kind of things that this lady was saying, I've been hearing from lots of really great Democrats as I've been working my campaign. And I keep hearing people say, well, it's only Heal, Utah that's worried about this. Nobody else is worried about it. And then I read the 150-page document that the state put out that they're applying for this project. And on page 72, there's a quotation from Governor Cox saying, well, nobody much complained or worried about the Canadian thing, so we assume that it's a get-go, that since nobody in Utah is worried about this, we're going to be fine. There won't be any public reaction to this. So how do we speak to our friends who already think that this is an okay source of energy?
Well, again, that's why we created this report. But again, if you go back to the 10 commandments of nuclear power, it's wrong from the standpoint of economics. It's wrong for the standpoint of the climate crisis. It's wrong for the standpoint of public health protection. Again, there's no safe level of radiation exposure. Every phase of the nuclear fuel cycle exposes the broader environment and all the people who live in it to more radiation. The more radiation you're exposed to, the more health problems you're going to have. And let me give you one other nugget here. It appears from epidemiologic studies that Utah teenagers suffered a significant setback in their SAT scores from the nuclear power detonations of the 1950s. Now, in that report, I can give you all the details, but if you look at the pattern of where the radiation went and whose children performed poorly all of a sudden on SATs, Utah's teenagers performed, before the nuclear weapons testing occurred, they had the highest SAT scores in the country. And then they dropped more than any other state in the country after this massive round of nuclear weapons testing radiation. That happened again a few years later. So the pattern was duplicated over at least 2 particular episodes. And that's plausible with all the research we have that nuclear radiation, among the other things that it does, it affects brain development in children, especially those in utero. We know, for instance, tritium can cross the placental barrier. So think about this. There's no dispute that tritium is one of the tritium is one of the nuclear radioactive isotopes that is discharged on a continual basis from nuclear power plants. Tritium passes through the placental barrier and can contaminate a fetus at any and all stages of intrauterine development. And because the brain is the fetus's primary fat reservoir, that's where a lot of environmental contaminants end up. So if you look back at the epidemiologic data, it's very strong that Utah's children suffered a major intellectual and academic setback because of the Nevada nuclear weapons testing era. Yes.
Oh, it's okay if I go. I'm a baby adult, so this question's probably ignorant, sorry. I'm a university student, and my professors are working on nuclear salt reactors, and, you know, based off of the way that they've talked about or engaged with them, it's the higher efficiency, better waste management, whatever else you would have you. And I went to a big conference that was in Salt Lake on nuclear waste last year, and the goal, through what I understood with Governor Cox, would be within 3 years of that timeline, making nuclear salt reactors be the main source of energy in Utah. Could you just walk us through why that would be bad? Because based off of all of the things that they were talking about, they're significantly different than a lot of the nuclear processes that we've seen in the past.
First disclosure, I'm not a nuclear engineer. Our specialty is what does radiation do to human health? And that, on that particular plane, we know more about it than just about anybody else. And our partners at HEAL have been at this for a number of years. But we're very interested and active now in that sort of debate. So I'm not a nuclear engineer. I can't really authoritatively address the risks, the benefits of salt as a coolant. But if you read the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, there are a lot of people there who are experts, who do post regularly, who say that there are all kinds of problems why that's not really a solution. Cost, danger. One of the things that, let me just mention quickly, with this recent fascination of SMRs, or small modular nuclear reactors, they require not necessarily more radioactivity as a fuel per se, but they give off more neutrons. So all of the structures around these smaller nuclear plants are now more radioactive than even the larger plants. And so they're going to be more costly to decommission. They're going to be more dangerous as they operate. So it's a good question. It's out of my league. Like I say, I'm not a nuclear fission expert, and I'm sorry about that. I wish I was. But from what I can tell from other people who look at that, they think, don't get too wrapped up in that because it's not likely to be a real panacea. Do I need to get out of town now, or?
No.
One more
All I'm
question.
going to do is make a comment. My predecessor in 1997, Kurt Oscarson, some of you in here know him, passed away as a product of being a downwinder. I actually ended up representing that. You can't hear me. Can you hear me this way? Better? Okay. In 1997, when I was appointed as a state legislator, it's because my predecessor, who was in the state legislature, Kurt Oscarson, had recently passed away as a product of being a downwinder. And people had gone in when he was in the hospital and ran his campaign. So he was reelected. And I came into the legislature 2 weeks later after that experience. Shortly after that, I lost a neighbor who was also a downwinder. And she took my hand in hers as I saw her at the hospital, and she says, "Tricia, my dad used to take us up after dinner to watch them, to watch the explosions. You know, we'd go sit up on the hillside and we'd all watch." And 5 members of her family passed away. So this is a real thing that we all need to be aware of. But I had the opportunity to be invited back to Washington to work a lot on the downwinders and to do the marches and such like that that were held here. So thank you so much for all that you have shared today.
Let me just finish with this little bit of a personal story. 8 of my 14 immediate family members have had cancer, including me twice and 2 of my children. It's hard for me to tell this story, but I do it repeatedly because everybody needs to hear it. I held my daughter's hand on her 27th birthday as she was wheeled into surgery for a double mastectomy. I have a daughter-in-law who right now has finished 10 months of intensive therapy to save her life from aggressive breast cancer. 6 months of the most toxic chemotherapy there is, a double mastectomy, a daily radiation dose, and now immunotherapy to try and keep her alive for 5 years, and she's the mother of my 4-year-old granddaughter. There are real lives who are being destroyed by our bad mistakes, and we don't want any more of it. Thank you very much.
Brian, thank you.